Hey everybody, Olivia here with the Tennessee Conservative to bring you this week's Big 7 update. But before we dive in, I want to remind you, if you don't already, to subscribe to our daily free e-newsletter. Super simple to do. All you have to do is text NEWS, N-E-W-S, to 423-205-5600, and boom, in your inbox every day you will get our newsletter, which is jam-packed full of information that you do not want to miss. So be sure to text NEWS to 423-205-5600. Also be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. If it's out there, we're on it. So make sure to track us down on X, Truth, Getter, Gab, Rumble, MeWe, and Parler. And with that, let's dive into our stories for this week. First on our list, the Tennessee House defers a bill limiting legal liability of pesticide makers until 2026. This is a big deal. So this bill sought to remove legal liability for chemical pesticide makers in certain suits pertaining to the warning labels which are required by the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, this became controversial because these chemical manufacturers currently have tons of lawsuits against them alleging that their chemicals and their pesticides cause cancer and a whole host of other medical issues. Bayer, in particular, who, by the way, is conveniently sponsoring this legislation, just had to pay out, or was just awarded a judgment against them of $2.1 billion to a man who sued them because he claimed that the weed killer Roundup, which we should all be familiar with, caused his cancer. And this is just one of many similar type lawsuits out there. There are also claims and court documents alleging collusion between Bayer and other chemical manufacturers and the EPA to keep cancer warnings off of their labels. So they're arguing they shouldn't be liable because the EPA is the one who determines what has to go on the label, but then they've also been colluding with the EPA to keep cancer warnings off these labels. So you see here, there's kind of a conflict of interest. So you can see, I'm sure, why this became a rather hot button topic and controversial bill. So as this is moving through the committee process, lawmakers heard testimony, of course, from both sides, both for and against, but ultimately the House committee decided to move it potentially to a summer study, but for sure defer it for the rest of the year. And Republican Clay Doggett actually moved the bill to 2026 and said there's a lot of questions that have been asked and a lot of information I think folks would like to hear more from stakeholders, which that's great. Anything that gets it out of the way for the time being works for us. The Senate actually passed their version of the bill 21-7 earlier. And surprisingly, I actually watched the floor meeting for that one, the floor session, and I actually don't often agree with Democrats, but they were the ones making the most logical and the correct arguments against this bill. A lot of them talked about how we as consumers don't have a lot of choice about what pesticides and chemicals go on the food that we buy from the grocery store. And I've never certainly seen the labels for the pesticides that they use in the grocery store. So really, we're not even allowed to see the labels at all. Just arguments like that surprisingly made a lot of sense. Obviously, the Senate did not agree with those because they still passed it 21-7. But for now, this bill is dead thanks to the House committee. So that is a really great thing. We obviously need to be on the lookout for the bill that comes up, which I'm sure it will next year. But fortunately, we can take that one off our plates. Though unfortunately, I can't say the same for other states. Bayer is really making a push for these shielding bills, not only for themselves, but others, which ultimately would encompass, I believe Janice Bowling pointed out, 14,000 chemicals, including one from China, which they sell and manufacture, but are not allowed to sell in their own country. So it's not good to remove these liabilities when we know how dangerous these chemicals are. And unfortunately, Georgia has signed their version of the bill, or it's awaiting the governor's signature. And North Dakota, Florida, Missouri, and I believe Iowa all have their own versions making their way through. The only state that I know killed this bill is Montana, which, as I understand, was only because it wasn't filed properly on time. So hopefully the rest of these states will kill this bill as it goes along. But very interesting trend we're seeing in these manufacturers trying to protect themselves from lawsuits for manufacturing horrible, death-causing chemicals. So that's a win. Next on the list, the House passes the Fertility and Contraceptive Protection Act, which undermines protections for the unborn. This was very unfortunate because this act, which was a seemingly benign bill to secure the right, quote unquote, to seek for assisted fertility treatments in the state, turned out to be very dangerous, because what it actually did was lay the framework and the groundwork to undermine a lot of the pro-life and anti-abortion bills that conservatives in Tennessee have fought for so hard. So this bill, again, was just designed to create a blanket right to seek fertility treatments, any and all kinds of assisted fertility, in vitro fertilization, artificial insemination, genetic testing of embryos, creation and destruction of human embryos, and the right to contraceptive. Now, you may be asking yourself, I didn't know there wasn't a right to that already. Guess what? There's not. There are no laws in Tennessee that prevent any artificial reproductive treatment or care or any of that. So very interesting that Iris Rudder, who was the sponsor of this bill, felt the need to put this on the books when there's nothing currently that doesn't allow for this. So Representative Gino Bolso saw the dangers of this bill. He gave us a great interview. You can check it out on TennesseeConservativeNews.com. He gave us a great interview exposing the dangers of this bill and why he proposed an amendment to House Bill 533, which would have, without altering any current practice in fertility treatment, one, stated as fact that there's no laws in Tennessee against fertility treatment. Number two, it would have made sure that abortion-inducing drugs could not be included in the definition of contraceptive. And number three, would have reaffirmed that the state has a compelling interest in the protection of life, because the state's definition of unborn child is a child from fertilization, i.e. conception, all the way through birth. So he wanted to make sure that that was reaffirmed and made clear so that unborn children can continue to be protected in Tennessee. Now, unfortunately, his amendment was tabled 65-31, which was very unfortunate, because the amendment really wanted to make sure that there wasn't a way to undermine abortion laws in the future, because as Representative Bolso said, if you were to concede that you can kill an embryo, then you've given up any scientific argument to outlawing abortion at any further portion of a pregnancy. Pretty hard to argue with that. Not only to mention that on the House floor, it was revealed that the ACLU and the Tennessee Medical Association have both come out way strong support of this bill. So it's pretty hard as a Republican, or particularly a conservative, to agree with anything that the ACLU is going to be supporting. So that should have raised some red flags for our representatives, but unfortunately it did not, because 54 of them voted for this legislation, while 37 voted against, and 8 representatives marked themselves present, not voting. All 37 no votes came from Republicans, many of whom, I am grateful to say, gave wonderful, rousing speeches and made wonderful arguments against the bill, but unfortunately just wasn't enough in this case. So this is unfortunate that this passed, but we're grateful for those legislators who stood in the gap and performed their duty as lesser magistrates and did stand on the right to life. Next on our list, we've got a bill which would hold charitable organizations liable for crimes committed by illegal immigrants. Now, this passed in the House Judiciary Committee 15-6 along party lines. Not a surprise, but we're glad it passed anyway. So this bill, which is sponsored by Representative Rusty Grills, allows a charitable organization that provides housing to a person whom the organization knows is unlawfully present in the United States to be held liable for a loss, damages, injury, or death resulting from a criminal offense committed by the person who's unlawfully present in the United States while the person is receiving housing services from the organization, if the organization's conduct in providing housing constitutes negligence, gross negligence, or willful and wanton misconduct. That's a really fancy way of saying that if an organization or an NGO is harboring illegal aliens and those illegal aliens then go out and commit heinous crimes, potentially these organizations could now be held liable for these damages because they were the ones harboring these illegals in the first place. So this is a really great bill. It's hopefully going to bring some accountability and force these organizations to be more vigilant in their vetting and their supervising. We've got to have accountability, because what happens is these aliens go out and commit all these crimes. They just get scooped up by law enforcement, and then there's no accountability for those that were offering them safe harbor in the first place. They should not have a base camp to be coming back to in order to then go out and commit these crimes, right? Seems to make sense. Seems common sense, but we know that common sense is rarer and rarer these days. So the corresponding Senate bill was sponsored by Brent Taylor and has actually already cleared the Senate floor 24-4. So that's great. So hopefully this one will make its way to the House floor. Hopefully it'll have the same support that it was shown in this committee, and we will get that one to the governor to sign. Great, really great bill. Another bill dealing with illegal immigrants, the Human Smuggling Bill to address illegal immigration, also passed its House committee. So this also passed 16-6 in the House Judiciary Committee. Carried by Representative Chris Todd, it would create strong penalties for the crime of human smuggling, which is defined in the bill as transporting, encouraging, or inducing 10 or more adults, or 5 or more minors, to either illegally enter the state or to remain in Tennessee through the act of concealing, harboring, or shielding them, specifically from law enforcement. So this is going to ensure that individuals cannot be directing people on, I don't know how to avoid ICE or avoid law enforcement, or be smuggling them away from law enforcement. Now, while I don't necessarily understand where they picked the number 10, I'm not sure why it's okay to load up 9 illegals in your van and it's not human smuggling, but then 10 and that's the limit. I'm not sure where we came up with that number, but this is still a great bill. And the sponsors have been adamant that it would not create criminal liabilities for innocent people who perhaps didn't know if an illegal was here, like if they're offering them shelter or whatever, they didn't know this person was an illegal. So we're protecting the innocent, but hopefully this will encourage, or rather discourage, people from trying to smuggle these illegals through the state or encourage them to stay here long term and help them evade law enforcement. This bill also empowers the Attorney General to crack down on human trafficking, which is very important. So it's going to give our Attorney General some more power and some more tools to use to make sure that businesses are not participating in human trafficking as well. So this is a great bill. Hopefully, again, this will see the same success on the House floor that it saw on the committee. The Senate version, also sponsored by Senator Taylor, passed its Senate Judiciary Committee in a 5-2 vote along party lines as well. So hopefully we'll continue to see progress on that one and get that one to the governor as well.
Guys, do go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com, hit that support button. It is my intention, if we can cobble together some additional money once Adelia gets out of the session, that's taking up a lot of our discretionary income, what little there is at the Tennessee Conservative. I would like to do subscriber acquisition campaigns, but they are expensive, they require setup, and you have to spend money. And if we can reach more people in Tennessee, and if more conservatives actually knew that their government was quite different than what it looks like right before Election Day when they get the campaign collateral, I think we would have a more conservative Tennessee. So go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com/support or mail your checks to P.O. Box 625, Signal Mountain, Tennessee 37377. That is P.O. Box 625, Signal Mountain, Tennessee 37377.
All right, and on the list, continuing on down, we have a bill allowing school districts to unenroll illegal students passes the Tennessee Senate. Now, this one has also become controversial for a lot of reasons, but this bill, sponsored by Senator Bo Watson, gives Tennessee public school districts the option to unenroll or refuse enrollment of illegal immigrant students. Now, it's important to remember here that this is optional. The bill says may, it doesn't say shall. There was a stronger bill on this topic carried by Senator Janice Bowling, but they killed that earlier. So we're left with one that says may instead of shall, but theoretically it's a good thing because it's a step in the right direction. Now, this bill also seems to be intended to go to challenge the Supreme Court case of Plyler versus Doe, which was the 1982 decision which ruled that states cannot deny any child, including undocumented, a free public education. So first of all, what a terrible Supreme Court ruling. That seems un-American, but that could also be the intent of this legislation because that could set a precedent for states all across the country. So that is a really good thing there. Under this legislation, if a student is determined to be unlawfully present, public school districts in Tennessee can refuse to enroll the student, unenroll the student, or they can charge the student tuition at a rate consistent with the out-of-county charge for that district. So several options. Again, this is if those school districts even choose to require a citizenship check to enroll in the school. We don't know how many districts would even take advantage of that, but at least it's on the books and it's a step in the right direction. So Senate Bill 0836 passed the Senate floor 19-13. And the corresponding House bill, which is 793, is scheduled for consideration in the House Finance, Ways, and Means Committee on Monday, April 14th. So we'll see. This seems, I have a feeling this one's going to go through, particularly given who the sponsors are, but you never know, especially given that the governor has come out and said he's not so sure about this bill, and he's not, he's a little waffly, but not a surprise to be a little waffly from Governor Bill Lee, is it? So we'll just see how that shakes out. We're continuing to monitor that one. Obviously, illegal immigrant pro advocates are not happy about that bill. I think they've called it mean. It's mean not to give the kids education. But I do have to say, William Lamberth made a very good point in saying that even if we educate these kids through high school, theoretically they're then unemployable anyway because they're not supposed to be here. And illegal immigrants aren't supposed to be able to get jobs, theoretically. So interesting arguments, interesting opposition arguments, which don't make a lot of sense. Again, I'm not sure how it's mean when you're not supposed to be in my country anyway, but I digress. So on to the next. The Second Amendment bill redefining deadly force and its application fails in the Tennessee Senate Judiciary Committee. This is a bummer. This bill was intended to have allowed Tennesseans to use deadly force to protect their property, to stop trespassing or destruction of property. So Democrats were arguing, of course, against this bill, saying, well, if I just lost my dog and I'm trying to get my dog and I have to come into your yard, you're just going to have the right to shoot me under the circumstances, which is, of course, ridiculous because it'd be pretty hard to show a need for deadly force to feel that you felt threatened, that it was reasonably necessary to shoot someone because they came into your yard to get their dog back. Or I think another Democrat tried to argue, well, what if a Girl Scout's coming to sell cookies on the front door and they're technically trespassing, so they could just get shot? Obviously, those are ridiculous arguments. It would be comical if they didn't take themselves so seriously, right? That's the scary part. So the bill's sponsor, Senator Joey Hensley, said, this bill would have established that a person is justified under certain circumstances in using deadly force against another to prevent or terminate the other from committing or attempting to commit certain property offenses. It authorizes that citizen to use deadly force if reasonably necessary to accomplish the lawful arrest of an individual who flees or resists the arrest for violating protection of property statutes. I have seen plenty of videos where people now are just trying to break into homes, following people home and literally trying to break in their doors, their windows, walk up to the driveway and point guns at their Ring cameras or home security systems. So there is a need to redefine this because there is a lot of property or destruction, stealing cars. They point the gun at the Ring cameras and will then just proceed to steal people's cars right out of their driveway. So there has to be some ability for Tennesseans to protect their property, right? It's a constitutional right to protect our property. So this bill did receive a 4-3 vote, but the problem was it didn't receive a majority because one senator declared herself present not voting. So technically there wasn't actually a majority, and that was Democrat London Lamar, who marked herself PNV, which unfortunately caused the legislation to fail, meaning it will not be moving forward this year. So it would have been a great bill, very helpful, but ultimately, unfortunately, dead for this session. And finally, rounding out our big seven here, the bill stripping GOPs of caucus rights makes further headway through the assembly. So this has been a very interesting bill. It's a bill which seeks to ultimately strip local GOPs of their convention and caucus rights by mandating that all partisan primary candidates must be selected through regular state-run August or November elections. Now, most counties in Tennessee already utilize standard primary elections to elect candidates for like sheriff, county commission, school board, etc. There are a few who do not. They still use caucuses or conventions to nominate those local parties at some of the smaller counties in Tennessee. And the chances are that most of these counties who are using a primary would not change that. If it works for them, it's going to work, and that's great, and it's easy. And obviously, we want more people voting for candidates than less. However, objections have risen because it's stripping away the choice of how a private political party runs their operation. So there's concerns about the constitutionality of the legislature controlling these parties. And there's also a huge issue. This has been the biggest issue by far we've seen from local GOP county chairs and citizens across the state, because it doesn't help with the issue of illegal crossover voting. We've talked about this a lot at TenCom because it continues to be a recurring problem, and the legislature refuses to close the primaries. In fact, they killed the bill this year, which would have closed the primaries. Now, that may come back. I'm not 100% sure because we'll see, it was placed behind budget theoretically, and they didn't even they didn't even hear the bill when it came up this year. They just refused to hear it at all. So we've got this issue of refusing to close the primary elections. So the sponsor of the bill, Lee Reeves, was asked by Representative Todd Warner in a committee hearing why he brought the bill and if there's actually even been any recorded problems with the caucuses across the state. And Lee said that this subject has been in front of the body for many years. And what happens when we propose a bill is we see a potential problem, something that needs to get fixed, and we propose it in a bill. I'm not sure how that answered the question, but okay. Warner rebutted, I've been down here 5 years, and this is the first time this has been brought forth. I'm a firm believer we ought to leave it up to the locals to decide how they run their elections. This is not a problem looking for a solution. This is a solution looking for a problem. And that seems to be the theme with a lot of bills this year. They seem to be inventing solutions to problems that don't exist, which are going to in turn create that problem. So in the House committee, the vote was 21-2 in favor. The only no votes were from Republicans Tim Rudd and Todd Warner. So we appreciate them standing on this, but this is a very dangerous amendment because it literally would strip our GOPs of the right to choose how we elect our candidates. And the local GOPs are supposed to know what's best for their community and how to engage the most people and how to most effectively select their candidates. So this is a big problem. In the upper chamber, the full Senate heard SB 799, which a bunch of senators touted that Tennessee has the most secure elections in the nation. So this bill is just going to be one more way that we have election integrity. But again, we have this consistent problem of illegal crossover voting where Democrats vote in Republican primaries all the time. So I'm not sure how we can have election integrity when we have people who are casting illegal votes. And there's been a lot of talk about disenfranchisement with this and, a caucus disenfranchises too many people. But when one Democrat votes illegally in a Republican primary, you have disenfranchised every single Republican vote. So I don't think that's a very strong argument when we're talking about disenfranchising a few people versus disenfranchising every single Republican voter. But that's just Olivia's opinion. So the Senate passed 799, 27-3. We had a couple people marking them, or one senator marking himself present not voting, and the 3 no votes were from Senators Joey Hensley, Brent Taylor, and Paige Wally. So again, we applaud them for standing up for the rights to vote. But other than that, it's a little tricky, and it's a little scary that the legislature is thinking it's appropriate to just wrest control away from both political parties. This would affect Republicans and Democrats alike. So this will be very interesting. If you have some opinions on this, since our party chair, Scott Golden, has remained very quiet, hasn't uttered a peep so far about this bill, you are more than welcome to go talk to your SEC members, who are elected, by the way. You theoretically elected them to represent your interests for the party. And our party chairman, the SEC is holding their quarterly meeting at the Hilton in Mount Juliet at 10 o'clock on Saturday, April 12th. So we are encouraging conservatives to show up and hold your elected representatives accountable for what they're doing to preserve your right to vote and for political parties to operate autonomously and not have the state dictate how elections have to go. So a little call to action for you there to round it out. But thank you guys so much for hanging in there. It's been my pleasure to bring you this week's Big 7 update from the Tennessee Conservative. As a reminder, subscribe to all of our channels, our podcasts. Once again, sign up for that newsletter. And if you could, we would sure appreciate any amount of money that you could send our way to keep us up and running. We are all in this because we love what we do, because the truth needs to be out there, but it still does cost things to keep the lights running and to get that free daily newsletter to you. So if you have any of your treasure to spare, we sure would appreciate it. Please know it does not go out void. We do our best to bring the truth to you every single day. We love what you do. We appreciate what all of you do, and we sure appreciate your support. So thanks so much for hanging in there, for listening, and getting your Big 7 update this week. Thanks, everybody.